Slovakia announced they would suspend diesel exports to Ukraine amid growing tensions over oil deliveries.
Ukraine and Russia wrapped up the second day of the US-brokered talks in Geneva after just under 2 hours of talks.
The European Commission announced 28 billion euros in loans for eastern border regions affected by the war in Ukraine.
The European Central Bank has denied reports that its president Christine Lagarde would resign before the end of her term. Hungary and Slovakia have announced they are suspending diesel exports to Ukraine amid growing tensions over oil deliveries. They said they need to secure their energy supplies to replace imports of Russian oil through the damaged Druzhba pipeline. Oil transfers from Russia to Hungary and Slovakia via the Druzhba pipeline were halted on the 27th of January. The Hungarian foreign minister stressed Budapest plays a major role in Ukraine's energy supply.
Magyarországon keresztül és Magyarországról Ukrajna gáz, áram és dízel üzemanyag importjának egy nagy része történik.
He added that Hungary will not resume diesel deliveries to Ukraine until crude oil deliveries via the pipeline resume. The pipeline carrying them was damaged by a Russian airstrike in Ukrainian territory, according to media reports. Hungary and Slovakia also called on the European Commission to enable the transport of Russian crude oil. The Commission said on Tuesday that Hungary's and Slovakia's energy security was not at risk, citing sufficient reserves in both countries.
Ukraine and Russia wrapped up the second day of the US-brokered talks in Geneva after just under 2 hours of talks on Wednesday. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky confirmed that the negotiations included 2 tracks, military and political. All 3 sides were constructive on the military track, he said. But the political track is more complex, Zelensky admitted. He said this aspect includes issues related to Ukraine's territories temporarily occupied by Russia. Russian chief negotiator Vladimir Medinsky called the talks difficult but practical. Russia-occupied territories of Ukraine remain the biggest sticking point in negotiations. Kiev maintains that freezing current positions offers the most realistic foundation for a ceasefire at this stage. But Moscow is demanding that Ukrainian forces withdraw from the Donbass as a precondition for any agreement. This demand includes parts of Ukraine's Donetsk and Luhansk regions, which Russia never controlled and still cannot occupy despite 12 years of attempts. Kiev has repeatedly rejected this request.
The European Commission has released a strategy to support eastern border regions struggling with economic decline, demographic pressure and hybrid threats stemming from the war in Ukraine. 28 billion euros in loans will be distributed in cooperation with the European Investment Bank and the World Bank to revive investment and business activity in the affected regions. The 9 EU member states set to benefit from the initiative called East Invest are Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria. The strategy also covers the European Drone Wall initiative to strengthen border security, support for integrating Baltic electricity networks into the broader European grid, and educational and employment programs aimed at addressing population decline in border areas. The detailed allocation of funds among member states has not yet been determined, but EU officials are expected to meet country representatives at an East Invest event scheduled for the end of February.
The Trump administration has helped Europeans stop hitting the snooze button and wake up, US Ambassador to the EU Andrew Purser told Euronews. He hailed US Secretary of State Marco Rubio's call for greater alignment between the two in his speech at the Munich Security Conference as positive for the transatlantic alliance. Pösder also praised European progress in aligning its approach to migration policy with the US, pointing to what he thinks is one of Europe's key issues, the impact of mass migration.
There's a difference between managed migration and mass migration. And I think what we've seen over the past decade is just flows of people coming in onto the continent. And the reaction has not been positive.
And if you take a look at Frontex,
when probed with numbers showing that migrants' arrivals in the EU have in fact declined compared with previous years, Pösder argued that Rubio was, quote, talking about the impact of the past mass migration and the civilizational challenge that poses.
Ukraine has imposed new sanctions against Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko for helping Russia to sustain its war against Ukraine. Belarusian opposition leader Svetlana Tsikhanouskaya spoke to Euronews about her country's influence on Russia's war.
Russia can use Belarus as a platform for pressure and even aggression against Europe. Under Lukashenko, Belarus has become deeply integrated into Russia's war machine. Russian troops train there. Joint military infrastructure is being modernized. Russia has deployed nuclear weapons in Belarus and is building infrastructure for systems like the Avreshnik missile. This creates direct threats not only to Ukraine but also to Poland, the Baltic states and actually wider Europe. It shortens warning times and increases escalation risks.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky noted that without the assistance, the number of Russian strikes on energy infrastructure and railways in northern Ukraine would likely have been lower.
Belarusian society is overwhelmingly against the war. The army's loyalty in such a scenario is not guaranteed. And Lukashenko understands that direct participation could destabilize his own regime. So, yes, Moscow will continue to pressure Minsk, but Belarus remains one of the weakest links in Russia's regional architecture. A democratic Belarus would remove major military foothold from Russia's western flank. This is why the Belarusian dimension must be part of any serious discussion about European security and the end of this war.
The sanctions package comes after the US eased some of its sanctions on Belarus, and the country joined the controversial Board of Peace introduced by President Donald Trump.
11 people have been arrested over the death of far-right activist Quentin Deranque, killed in a violent brawl in Lyon.
4 departments in western France remain on red alert for flooding until Thursday, and 9 others are on orange alert for rain and flooding with the arrival of Storm Pedro. After a lull on Tuesday afternoon, Météo France announced further widespread disruption in the west of the country. Already experiencing some of its worst flooding in decades after days of rain, authorities have spoken of record levels of humidity not seen since 1959 and linked it to climate change. Charente-Maritime, Gironde, Lot-et-Garonne and Maine-et-Loire are the departments most affected. The flood waters forced the evacuation of nearly 2,000 residents between Agen and Bordeaux and caused thousands of power outages, officials said. The French government said it will provide support to communities affected by the bad weather. With most of France still on flood alert, weather authorities have said Storm Pedro, arriving from Brittany, is set to impact France on Wednesday and Thursday, bringing another bout of heavy rainfall and winds.
Romania's highest court has ruled a law reforming pensions for judges and prosecutors is constitutional, with the bill now set to be signed into law by the president. The new legislation raises the retirement age from 50 to 65 and limits pensions to no more than 70% of the salary they receive in the final month of services.
Nu ne mai putem permite să pensionăm oameni în deplinătatea forței fizice și intelectuale la 50, 51 sau 52 de ani. În luna martie vom veni cu un proiect de lege care va continua corecțiile.
Această reformă deschide calea și pentru alte reforme care să taie din privilegii.
Este o sumă totuși importantă, avem ce face cu suma respectivă în bugetul României, deci eu sper că nu am pierdut această sumă.
The adoption of the draft law is necessary to access the EU funding through its Recovery and Resilience Funds, which amounts to 231 million euros.
Am încredere că
Dacă își face bine treaba domnul ministru Păslaru, nu vom pierde acei bani.
After 5 postponements, the Romanian Constitutional Court sent the law that changes magistrate pensions to promulgation. In practice, the payments will be capped to 70% of the last net salary. At the moment, a retired judge or prosecutor can get more than 4,000 euros, whilst the average pension in Romania is about 500 euros. At the same time, Romania is trying to unlock now 231 million euros that are tied to this reform. Ruth Novakovic for Euronews.
The European Commissioner for Sport has condemned the participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the Milan Cortina Paralympic Games under their national flags. Glenn Mikelev has announced a boycott of the opening ceremony for that reason. While Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine continues, I cannot support the reinstatement of national symbols, flags, anthems and uniforms that are inseparable from that conflict, he wrote on X. Russians and Belarusians have been prohibited from competing under their flags in the Olympics and Paralympics since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. They are, however, allowed to participate as individual neutral athletes, a category that allows people who have qualified for the Games to join the competition under certain conditions, such as not actively supporting the invasion and not being contracted to the Russian or Belarusian military or national security agencies. These conditions were applied in Paris 2024 and are also the rules for the current Milan Cortina Olympics, with 13 Russian and 7 Belarusian athletes participating in the competition.